My name is Walt Newman from Warner Brothers, and we're doing Breaking the Biz podcast.
Breaking the Biz. Breaking the Biz. Breaking the Biz.
Stay tuned for today's episode of Breaking the Biz, an informative podcast where we dive into the world of entertainment by interviewing seasoned professionals who have made their mark in the industry. Gain invaluable insights as they share their personal journeys, offering advice on navigating the dynamic landscape of the entertainment industry. Whether you're an aspiring actor, musician, filmmaker, author, animator, or any creative soul, tune in for expert career guidance, insider tips, and first-hand accounts on breaking into the entertainment industry. Get ready to unlock the secrets behind successful careers and fuel your own passion for the limelight. Please remember to like this video and to subscribe to our channels for more great conversations.
Greetings from Breaking the Biz, brought to you by Yes I Can Unity Through Music and Education. I'm William Felber, your navigator through the intriguing universe of the entertainment industry, as revealed by the visionaries and creators who bring it to life. Stay tuned as we delve into diverse insights from the forefront of entertainment, hearing from pioneers, creators, and agents of change. Prepare for a journey filled with tales of innovation, resilience, and the undying quest for artistic brilliance.
Well, welcome everybody to your shorter holiday week edition of Breaking the Biz. We've got a great guest with us tonight. We've got Walt Newman, who is a sound designer. We'll give a quick introduction on the bio that we've got, and then we'll dive right in. While watching Under the Dome, you might not see Walt Newman, but you can feel his work through every moment of the show. As supervising sound editor, he creates the environment and sets the tone, so to speak, for each episode. A local product of Hollywood High School and Cal State Northridge, he's risen to the top of his industry with 5 Emmy Awards. He took a moment to share some insights about how he brings the Dome's world to life. With all TV shows and movies, sound and music are edited to the picture unless it's animation. Every sound from air, birds, gunshots, cars, skids, you name it, is all come out. It's all cut out of a library of millions of sounds. The dialogue is recut and cleaned up. Every footstep's added to every one in the film. Everything has to be cut to fit in terms of length, sync, and the type of sound it is. A Volkswagen sounds different than a Ferrari. A crow sounds different than an eagle, and so on. And of course, there's 500 different crow sounds to choose from. So, Walt, thanks for joining us tonight. How did you find your journey to doing sound design?
It was a journey probably not a lot of people take. I never dreamed I would actually be in so-called show business. I start off, grew up in the Valley, Chatsworth, and my father was a sound editor at Columbia Pictures on Gower back in the day. He used to do like Three Stooges and stuff like that. And to me at 10 years old that was the shit. And so he did a lot of big movies, did a lot of stuff, but I honestly never really wanted to follow in his footsteps. I kind of thought I'd be playing for the Lakers, but they don't have a need for a 6-foot power forward, so I can't shoot. So you kind of segue somewhere else. So I went to Hollywood High. I went to Cal State Northridge, actually got a degree in social psychology, not film or anything. That was like the farthest from my mind. Out of college, got a job at Job Corps, which was a federal government sponsored program going back to the Johnson administration, I think, helping kids and because I thought I was going to save the world, but the world doesn't want to be saved like I thought it did. And got another job as a sales rep afterwards. And then one day I met my father for lunch at Warner Brothers and walked into the main building, Producers 4. And mind you, I came from a job where you had to be there at 9 o'clock and you stay till 6 and you got 15-minute breaks and you did all this kind of stuff. And I see this room with all these guys, all these reels, they're all reading the paper and they're listening to the radio, having a good old time. And I thought, I can do that. And I met this guy who was the head of Warner Brothers Music that day. This guy named Dick Harris, looked just like John Wayne. And I was kind of BSing with him and I was kind of kidding around. And I said, well, if you ever need somebody to work here, I can do that. And clear blue sky a year later, the guy called me and he offered me a job. And,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
at that
Can
time,
we
I
leave Ren
was,
and Stimpy alone during lunch?
Okay.
Thanks.
and so at that time, I took a shot and I started at Warner Brothers not knowing a thing. And the rest is kind of history. So there you go.
Like many people who find their way in the film industry or entertainment industry, it's all about being at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, exactly. And if I wasn't there that day or I didn't go to lunch or whatever, I'd still be a sales rep for some company somewhere. I'm sure I would have been fine. But as someone who didn't, really aspire at that time to do it, but then once you fall in, there's a certain magic to it when you're walking around the lot and, you know, someone like, my first date, Jane Fonda came up and asked me for directions to a stage. I mean, that's magical, and stuff like that doesn't happen. I remember Wonder Woman walking out of the ADR stage and her Wonder Woman stuff, and I'm just going, I have a job at this place. I mean, people would kill to have that job. So you make the best of it, and you hope you last, and you hope you do it, and you work your butt off. And unfortunately, I worked like 31 days, got in the union, and then was laid off for 3 months because I wasn't quite know that it was so seasonal. And I thought I made a huge mistake. But then they called me back, and then things, progressed. So I've always to this day consider myself very, very lucky, very lucky. And when I would drive into the lot and I see that water tower, the big, huge Warner Brothers water tower, I remind myself, I know how many people would give their right arm just to drive on the lot, much less work here. So, not every day was like that, but a lot, most were.
It's humbling when you get to work around stars and around that iconic water tower or
Yeah.
any
Yeah,
studio lot for that matter.
sure. Yeah, it's great.
That's wonderful. And what year did you start working over there?
I actually started in 1979.
And was sound design, how was it done? Was it all reel to reel tape back then, or
It was all actually single stripe mag.
okay.
So what you would do was how I actually started cutting anything is, like I said, I actually started music, but I found out I didn't have quite that. I have no musical background. I can't play an instrument. I can't do anything like that. I was working on this big movie at the time as a assistant, and it's called Altered States. And it was a huge movie back in the 80s. And the music editor had to go somewhere, so I was covering the dub stage, and he says, "You never have anything to do, it's all there." And of course it wasn't. And the director, this guy Ken Russell, who was certifiably crazy, decided he wanted all the oboes cut out of a cue. I didn't know what the hell an oboe even sounded like. I called a friend of mine who was a musician and played it, and he goes, "There's one, there's one, there's one." So I kind of knew my future wasn't in music. And so I was lucky enough that I switched over anyway and started working in sound. Started working, cutting trailers and teasers on Dukes of Hazzard. And believe me, those trailers and teasers on Dukes of Hazzard are like cutting a whole TV show. So from there, you just kind of progress, and you learn as much as you can. And I used to basically go in at that time, the Warner Brothers old timers were there, and they were all like 65, 70. They'd been there since the Jazz Singer. And I would go in their rooms and see how each guy did, how he would cut. And you kind of make your own system. Of course, everybody thought they cut better than the next guy, and their system was the best, but you kind of devise a system. And the only thing they had to work with was mag. It was single stripe, and you put it in a gang of, maybe had 4 or 8, lines of where you could put the film in, and you ran it with the sound, and you made up sounds like that. And you figure out what sounded good together. And when we started switching over to digital, the new guys were basically shocked I could do that in my brain by then and not have to do it on a computer. So basically, that's how you did sound design. You ran this stuff together on a giant gang of stuff, and you could hear it, and you wound it, and you slowed it down, and you did all this stuff. And that was basic sound design. You could slow stuff up in a transfer place, or you could do things like that, but it wasn't all the bells and whistles they have today, that's for sure. So, it was very generic, and very mechanical, very mechanical. So it was cool. I enjoyed it.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Were you working, did you have access to reels and different sounds that were already pre-recorded, or were you doing a lot of your own Foley as well?
Okay, so how it worked in those days is Warner Brothers had a gigantic library, and they were literally in catacombs on the lot. I mean, and I'm not kidding. They were in these old, rusted out buildings, and you need a tetanus shot to go in. It was, no, I'm dead serious. And they had a card catalog, so you'd look up stuff and say you needed a Mustang, or you needed, a chin sock. You go through a little card catalog of hundreds and hundreds of things, and then you go in these catacombs, and there are these metal boxes, and they all say YE 110 through 115, and you grab these rolls of mag with the sounds on them. You take them back and you cut them, and that's how it worked. There was no you had to take it, usually not from there, but to transfer, and they would transfer and make you a copy of it. So then it goes a generation down, of course, and then you go back and cut it, and God forbid you crinkle it, or God forbid you tear it, or any of that kind of stuff, because then you have to start the whole process again. But Warner Brothers had thousands upon thousands of old movies and sounds. And I did one show. It was a Spencer for Hire. It was like in the 80s, and he had a Mustang, and it was a 2+2 fastback Mustang, and there was this gigantic car chase, and it was through the streets of Boston. So what the old timers would do is they had a Falcon they had a series of, and they just cut the Falcon. So I went in and I looked up the Bullet Mustang, and I got the series on the Bullet Mustang, and it didn't want to sound like bullets. So I also got, somebody had shot a series of a hot rod from 77 Sunset Strip back in the day. Got that and got another card, combined them all together, did that thing where you listen to them, so it's all sync and they all rev at the same time. They do all that stuff. And that's basically how it was done. It's kind of, it was painstaking, and it was a lot slower, because now, you just dial it up and you type in your system, fastback Mustang 66, in and stop from 60 miles an hour. Boom, you're there. You got 20 of them. In those days, you had to really search, and you had to match, and it was very, very time consuming. But nobody knew at the time, because that's just the job. You just did it. So it was interesting. It was fun. But when everything went digital, everything changed. I mean, and that was pretty much overnight. So
that was in the 90s, right?
Yeah, actually, I did the ER pilot on film, and that was like in April, May. And by the time we came back in August or September, everything had changed to digital. And I remember I had loops and things, backups, because I didn't trust the digital stuff at that time, because it was so new, and they had wave frames, which were just incredibly complicated. So we went, when the studios found out they could save so much money on transfer, on a guy who works in transfer, on all the stock, all the stuff, and do it quicker and faster, and eventually, cut it digitally, happened overnight. Literally happened overnight. I thought it would take 5 years. It happened overnight. And then consequently, what happens is, when I did a show like whatever, like something like Dukes of Hazzard or whatever, you have 5 editors and an ADR editor, and there were 5 reels, and everybody be responsible for the reel in its entirety except ADR. So you have to learn to cut the dialogue, you'd have to learn to do the Foley, you'd have to learn to do the sound effects. So that's how I got the background of learning all that stuff. And so every show had 5 or 6, 7 people on it. By the time I was doing the West Wing ER and Third Watch all at the same time, I had like 4 people total. So, studios save a bunch. And so, that's why that stuff happens overnight. If there's a way to reboot, they'll reboot.
I'd imagine it took quite a while to transfer all that, the thousands and thousands of mags into digital, though.
forever, forever. And and my entire library was on film. And so we'd make up these reels, and I'd have literally hundreds of 1,000-foot reels with, of doors, of cars, whatever they were labeled. And at that time, they would transfer them to DAT. So then consequently, I had all these DATs. So 2 years later, nobody used DATs. So I had to transfer that into the systems. So yeah, and and at Warner Brothers in particular, they tried a lot of stuff. Started with Waveframes, and they went to Fairlights, and then they went to, eventually Pro Tools, which was, the universal thing. But to get everything done and in those systems was kind of a nightmare. And so,
For those of you that don't know what a DAT is, it's a tape, like a digital audio tape.
yeah, and it holds thousands of sounds, and or not thousands, but it can hold a lot. And so then I still have boxes of DATs for some reason. I don't know, sentimental value. I don't throw them away. But yeah, and then went in digital. I mean, I remember I went up to this guy, and we needed a chin sock for some show, and we were dubbing, and I said, you got to change the chin sock. It's wrong. So he goes, okay. I said, well, play me a couple. And he goes on his computer. I'll never forget. 900 of them came up. And I'm thinking, okay, well, this is not the way to do it either, because you get lost in that stuff. So you kind of make your own library, and you do your own thing. Because to be honest with you, your library is what gets you where you want to go. And the better your library is, and the better you can manipulate it, and the better you can make it work for you, and the better, and the stuff you have. And when you get the features, you get to record it all. But for TV or something, that's what can make you good. Can make you sound really good. And mixers, of course, but whatever.
That makes sense. It's kind of like an artist's or a painter's color palette.
It's kind of like it's kind of like a cacophony of sound, and you just have to make it work. And people would say, like on ER, some of those traumas, you have all these beeps, and and we did, speed up, backup beeps, and phone signals. You drop everything in there, but there had to be a certain point where it builds, and literally we would take doctor's notes with a doctor as a person got sicker and sicker and how to play stuff, and either they die or they get better at the end, and then you kind of have to start get rid of stuff, and it's kind of got to be flawless, right? You really don't want to notice it, and when you got 12 alarms going, it's a little bit of a challenge. So then you walk into the room next to it, and they got another whole trauma going with 12 different ones. So yeah, it can be, you can definitely get lost in this stuff. So yeah.
I'm sure at some point you've come across the Wilhelm scream.
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure. We used it. I did it. There was a pilot back 15 years ago or something, and the director wanted the Wilhelm scream anywhere you could put it. And I think it was called Hard Target maybe or something. And I said, well, it kind of works once, because, it just, after you get clued into it, you hear it every time.
Oh yeah.
So, he said, no, and we'd be mixing, and he goes, put it here. And, on the food chain thing. So you go, okay, whatever. So yeah, definitely, you can't use it too much, let me tell you.
Who here's heard of the Wilhelm scream before?
I have.
A couple of you. I'm gonna play a quick sample of it, just because if you don't know it by name, you've definitely heard it. So let's give that a quick listen here.
Okay, right.
The first one you did up here was much better.
Oh!
No, not an owl. A real scream.
Here it is right here.
Pain.
Oh!
There you go.
That's the Wilhelm scream.
Yeah.
Heard in all sorts of movies, TV,
Yeah.
commercials.
It's snuck in everywhere.
Yeah. It
And
was
if you,
popularized by Star Wars that to the point
yeah,
where it's a running gag now in the franchise.
exactly. And it's this particular director guy, of course, said, I want this to sound like Star Wars. And I said, well, they never leave Earth, but it's whatever. Everybody in that vein wants their show to sound like Star Wars. And it took them years to do Star Wars. It takes us a week, so it's a little bit different ballgame, but whatever. But yeah, the Wilhelm scream, they sneak it in all over the place.
So, what was your first job title when you got started?
Apprentice.
Okay.
And you get hired as an apprentice, and you basically break down, cues, and you load. Got that in those days. You made dupes. You got dupes of the picture, and you put them on reels. You went. You delivered stuff to, the film or whatever to people's. You were kind of like help all the editors on that show, and you would build units with all the sound effects. With the reels, and you wind them, and you put in a sound effect like at 22 feet chin sock, and they give it to you, and they mark it, and you have to go down and sync and put it in, and that kind of stuff. Then you move up to assistant, and that's kind of when I switched over to sound. And then I became, one day out of clear blue sky, they called me in and said, you're going to start cutting on the show V, which was like this huge show in the 80s, which was this lizard aliens that came to Earth, and you didn't know they were aliens because they looked like people, and it was a busy thing. And they said, you're going to be an editor on it. And it was like a year of being an assistant. So you either sink or swim, and somehow I busted my butt. So you kind of go on a bunch of shows, and you kind of gain a bunch of experience and cut a bunch of stuff, and then I would cut more feature style. The Warner Brothers old timers, who were great, wonderful guys. One guy had an edict that he wouldn't go out over 7 tracks, including backgrounds. If other guys never go more than 10, I'd be out 25 on a Dukes of Hazzard, teaser. And so consequently, what happened was I'd show up on the stage with these gigantic reels, and they'd mix them, and then they go to the next one and we kind of fall flat, which didn't make them too happy, but it's the way it goes. And so the producers and stuff started, they'd ask who cut this, da 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 da, and they'd meet you, and and be at any kind of sense of the room at times. Well, you know what to say. And like a year later, I started supervising. I don't know, it was on China Beach or Spencer. Anyway, so you kind of, you start supervising, which at that time, that's what that social psychology degree came in, because I was supervising guys that had been there for 35 years. And so then you kind of just, you go with the flow, and you start doing, you do TV. I got into features. I was doing both for a long time, and then I just did features. And then the thing that changed everything was ER. That changed everything. So, because I was on the feature plane, doing that, but I was never, there's a certain thing about features and TV. It's not as much anymore as I think it used to be, but you were kind of looked down doing TV, and features were like, features were the thing. So that never fazed me, because it didn't matter to me. So I didn't mind doing features. I didn't mind doing TV. And then, like I said, I think I did Unforgiven, and we were rolling pretty good back then. But ER came along, and took once again took a shot. Thought I might go 13 episodes. In 15 years. So that's kind of the way it goes. Got lucky.
Yeah, especially back in those days, there was a bigger separation on the style of how TV was done and how features were done. And I feel like, maybe the last 15, 20-ish years, TV has been a lot more, it's become much more cinematic and
Well,
kind of leveled up.
You're looking at something like Game of Thrones. It's incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And but having said that, when we did shows like ER was busy as could be. I mean, those shows were busy. And Third Watch, or something, Walking Dead or whatever. But we'd have like a week to do it and 2 or 3 days to dub it. ER done it 2 days, and that's with a playback.
Wow.
So the Game of Thrones, they pre-dub it. And it takes them weeks. It makes a big difference, and you have a lot more time to prepare. And you go out and shoot stuff, and but I can't begrudge those guys. However they do that job, it's Stranger Things, all those things. They're great. I mean, they're great. And so, different ball game as opposed to a straight out studio where you don't get the time or the show per se to let you do what you'd like to do. And in the beginning, they all say the same thing. Oh yeah, I'm going to send you out. Why don't you record this, and this, because we don't want it to sound like any other show. And of course, you say sure, but it never happens. We did Third Watch, a show that was shot in New York for 6-7 years or something. And I kept hearing, I want you to go to New York. And they'd have like 30, 40 different backgrounds to show. And they'd say, it'd be great if you went there and just record all the backgrounds. And sure, put me on a plane. I'm good. Never happened. Because they figured, because after a while, you find the backgrounds that work. And it's satisfactory. And then in our world too, music is a huge player. So they tune in the music in these scenes and stuff like that. So maybe not so important as a feature where it really has to sound real. So, and you're getting it over all these speakers all over the place, as opposed to, stereo.
Yeah, that makes a big difference too. And I'm sure, knowing social psychology, there's a certain level that sound design plays directly into that.
In the sense of how?
I'd say like
The director?
I don't know if I want to say manipulating, but it really drives the audience's emotions along with the music.
If you can, okay. To me, the best thing that can happen is if you have a sound design scene and it works so well, they dump the music because you're making that emotion and you're doing it. We did The Walking Dead, and in the pilot, there were a bunch of times where they had music and they just dumped it because of that the creepiness or whatever you guys did just works better. Whereas the music, manipulates it, and it's supposed to. It gives it emotion. It, makes you cry, makes you all this, all that kind of stuff. But when you do a show and it's a big show, like Walking Dead was or something at that time, when they start dumping stuff because they think the music, the sound effects, tones, or backgrounds, the creepy stuff that you created that gets you down the hallway to where the zombies are behind the door, is much more tension than that music is supplying. So to me, that's the ultimate compliment when that happens. So yeah, you got to get in the director's head or who's ever doing the show. Not always the easiest thing to do. I've been lucky, but there's a few. They want their shows to sound like something that doesn't work. And you try to explain it. You can't do a cop show, in the subway. And the guy said, I want it to sound like Minority Report. Okay. And they expect you to come with something. Then you come with something and it's like, I don't know if that works. But then again, you spent 5 days doing it. So it's hard, it's not like a feature. Features, you have time mostly. So, you have time to do it. Different ballgame.
Yeah, that fast turnaround of TV.
Yeah.
You got to have your instincts and just go with it.
And then if you have a feature director that's kind of a jerk, I had one, I did a show with J-Lo. She's a cop, Shades of Blue or something. And her personal producer and stuff, was not the nicest woman, maybe. And they wanted to change this whole thing. And I said, well, I have to get a loop group in. This is the last day of the dub. And I got to change this whole thing. Oh, so you're not going to do it right? So you get those powers that be that just won't take no for an answer anyway. So yeah, sometimes, they're great, sometimes incredibly understanding and they know what you're doing, but sometimes not so much. So yeah, I've been honestly 99% lucky. So it's good.
Tell us about your first Emmy win.
Um, First Emmy win was first year of ER, and ER was kind of a phenomenon back then. And I mean, it would get literally Super Bowl shares on TV, but it was before cable, pretty much, and stuff like that. And so the first year we won an Emmy, and I think we won 4 out of the next 5 years or something like that. And uh, it's the right vehicle at the right time, and that has a lot to do with it. I mean, I remember one year we were up against some show, and I saw the shows, and I thought this guy's show was incredible, incredible. And I said, we have no business if we win this thing. And we won. And I went and told the guy, I said, dude, you deserve this a hell of a lot more than we do. I mean, but it wasn't ER. It wasn't the number one show on TV, right? It's not a CSI. It's not one of those things. And I've seen a lot of great shows that never get nominated because they're just lost somewhere. And some of these guys do incredible work. They're not Game of Thrones and they're not stuff like that. But you watch and go, geez, that's great. Never see the time of day in an award show. So that's why the Golden Reels are a little more, I think, valid, maybe, because they'll find those shows at times, which I like. So it's good.
What year was that first Emmy win?
94, 95.
Okay.
Something like that.
Very cool.
And then I think Wells came out with Third Watch the next year or something like that, and we won for that. And we won a bunch on ER again, and a bunch of Golden Reels in between. So yeah, very lucky. And honestly, I've had the same crew for 25 years or something, and we all know what each other's doing, and that's a huge part of it. I mean, all the same style, because I have a certain style. It's kind of a feature style. And we've had people come in, and I've had numerous guys say, oh, they want to cut on ER. They want to cut on ER. I said, okay, here's a reel. Cut and show me what you got. After they're done, they don't want to cut on ER because it's way busier than you think it is. And, or other shows. So, West Wing, busier than you think, there's a whole thing about staying out of the way of the dialogue on that show. So you got to be careful and, do what you need to do, because that thing is pristine in the cleanliness part of, if there's something wrong, you're going to hear it. So there's a lot of stuff like that. And it's fun, till it isn't.
I'd imagine having 25 reels, 25 tracks going on ER, it allows for, it's really hard for it to not sound really busy and oversaturated.
Well, that's a funny way to say it is, the guy who I mentioned earlier who said he's never been out more than 7 tracks on a show, Warner Brothers old timer guy. His philosophy was, you can't hear more than 7 things at once. And that was his rationale for that. But you can, and a lot of those are layers of, one, like a gunshot. You may have 7 elements for one gunshot, or a chin sock. I mean, all the chin socks in those 50 shows all sound exactly the same because they are the same. And then you start in the later shows or later mood features, I mean, I've had chin socks with 7, 8, 10 elements. And if it's a good mixer, you hear every bit of those. So yeah, there's a certain thing about layering. There's a certain thing about, making it all work. But and the one guy who I did supervise with, he had a thing about backgrounds, and you would literally cut 100 backgrounds per scene, which I thought was absolutely nuts. And we used to get a fight about it. I'd say, this is crazy. You're going from one corridor in a hotel room to another corridor, and you're switching 32 air backgrounds. Meanwhile, there's a machine gun and a guy in a helicopter out the window they're shooting at. Nobody's going to hear him. But, he went on to win a bunch of Academy Awards, and I didn't. So show you what I know.
There's something very interesting about the competing frequencies when you're working with dialogue and those sounds and then music. It's also interesting. One thing I've learned about more recently is how lower frequencies need to be turned up louder to sound the same compared to higher frequencies. There's that whole curve.
Well, there's a whole thing on lower frequencies, especially on TV, is when they mix them in on a dub stage, you don't hear them on TV.
Right.
They disappear. And so what consequently happens is you have this low drone or something that's eerie or something that sounds great on the stage. And when you watch on TV, it's gone. So then you raise it on the dubbing stage, and it sounds like a mistake, and it starts covering up everything. There's such a fine line. High pitched noises are different in the sense that certain people hear them and certain people don't. A lot of people can't hear crickets. A lot of people had a mixer that great, wonderful guy. He couldn't hear a cricket, because that frequency in his hearing was gone. And what consequently happens is not a sexist thing or anything, but women are really good with high frequency. Really good. Really good. And they can hear it. And sometimes we do a show on something, and if you had a woman producer, so you'd hear something and I'll hear it, and damn, you unwind everything. And sure enough, there's something in there that's this weird high pitched noise, but it was covered up by everything else, and they'd hear it. And so some directors have that. It's poodle ears. They work. And high pitches, tricky, low tonal stuff disappears unless you're in a feature, like I said, with all the speakers and they can tweak it. Different ballgame, totally different ballgame. And you got to be careful not to get muddy, because if you do car crash or something and you make it huge in a feature, you put that big, huge low end boom in it. Sure, it sounds great, but you get it on TV, you just mushed out the whole thing. So there's a fine line there too. You got to be careful with that.
When stuff goes to broadcast, I know it's different now with streaming and stuff, but when it comes to broadcast, which most TV is optimized for, do they have their own amount of compression they apply additionally?
Yeah. Okay, as an example of this, we used to dub those ERs very loud. I mean, louder than normal TV, at that time in the 90s. And it never sounded right on TV. And then you get, a CD back or whatever we had in those days, and it sounded good again. So it turns out there was a guy at NBC, and he literally rode a fader, and he would see the dials go up into the red, right? The way it was mixed, and they'll stay there for a second in the mix. You can't say they're long, but they will. And he'd turn it down, and then he'd just leave it down. So the whole show would play flat. So we literally went down there and said, what are you doing? So he said, that's the way you're supposed to do it. And I said, I don't know about that. So John Wells, who was the executive producer of VR, I think made a few phone calls, and all of a sudden it started playing a lot better. So yeah, broadcast is and every cable station and every network, some networks sound really good. A show like Lost sounded pretty good. Some of these shows sounded good. Some networks, I think maybe Fox or something, they would flatten out everything. Or CBS maybe. It was really, and it's really disappointing when you do these big sound jobs for a TV thing and they sound so good, and then it's on air and the producer calls you the next day in your room and say, what the hell happened? It's not what we did. And that happened a lot. And I go, yeah, welcome to showbiz and breaking in the biz, buddy. There you go. So,
there you go.
Yeah.
And I'd imagine it still holds true now, but as far as TV goes, there's got to be a high 90% of people that are watching TV with just the built-in speakers on the television, which may or may not sound better than others, but they're ultimately going to not have the bass low frequency response. And then every now and again, you watch TV, you have your home stereo hooked up, or you have a Bose system or something,
right? And
then you hear all these sounds that you never heard.
Yeah, all of a sudden you got a helicopter coming in over your head. And the funny thing is, back in the 90s or 2000s, we started to have to dub down these versions of the Wells shows for telephones because he said that people aren't going to watch things on TV anymore. They're going to be looking at their phones and watching it. I'm glad it really never came that true. I mean, I'm sure people do, but he said like big sound systems are going to go away. And I think he's wrong, but we used to literally have to dub them for like a phone version. So you really, that's basically just dialogue and a bunch of stuff in the background. And there's dubbing, there's a lot of different ways to do it. Everybody's tried something different. It seems to go back to the natural way of doing it with, sound effects and dialogue guy doing their jobs, making it sound good. They tried mobile mixing for a while, which in my mind didn't work. Where one guy literally sat in a room next to the editor, the film editor, and would mix the show down in its most basic value. And they would term it guerrilla filmmaking. I'd term it crap. So it didn't sound good. You couldn't understand the dialogue. And that's the main thing. And I told like John Wells one day, he asked me, because they did that show Southland like that. And he asked me how I thought it sounded. And I didn't do it. And I said, look, man, it's not whether that explosion goes left or right or how big it is, or you hear the debris. But if I can't understand the dialogue and understand the story, you lost me. And I can't understand it. Because when your production stuff is so loud on the set and they're filming all over the streets of LA and they're not stopping traffic and they're not doing this, but they think it sounds real. Yeah, it sounds real when you're out there on the street. But no, after they put it through something. And then they try and filter it and they try all this stuff and it sounds totally phony. So whatever, so gladly.
Into
Yeah,
that.
exactly. So it seems like they've gone back to the standard pretty much, which is great. Or one guy mixing a show. There used to always be three guys. There used to be a dialogue guy, a music guy, and a sound effects guy. They got rid of the music guy pretty well everywhere. And now dialogue guy usually mixes music and dialogue, and a sound effects guy mixes sound effects and Foley. But yeah, it's hopefully standardized a little bit again because they've tried everything to save money, everything.
So jumping forward to Under the Dome, I imagine that was a pretty big difference from doing ER.
Under the Dome was fun. I mean, the executive producer, was a Spielberg guys, and they kind of let you just go with it. And the whole concept of the thing of the dome coming down, crashing into Earth, I think it actually came from an old Twilight Zone, but I'm not sure. But yeah, they gave you pretty much carte blanche, which I've been, the funny thing about the Emmys and all that stuff that you mentioned is it gives you this weird credibility, that all of a sudden, oh, his stuff must be good, and it's not always true, but they let you kind of do what you want to do instead of instructing you. So I've been lucky enough that I've had very loyal producers and stuff and directors and crap, and they kind of just say, just do your thing, take it to the stage, mix it, and when we get there, want to change it, we change it. I said, okay. And so, in that sense, I've been really, really lucky. And Under the Dome was one of those shows, had a lot of stuff to create, had, the big, huge thing that when the dome comes and hits in a mixing theater, the whole room rocked. It was great. I mean, the chairs squeaked. And you take it home and it's, and you go, shit, So it's the ball game. But yeah, Under the Dome was fun. And actually, I thought it would go more than, I think it only went one season. I thought it would go more.
Yeah, it only lasted a couple of years, right?
Yeah, I think a couple of years and that was it. But yeah, I was kind of disappointed, because it was a good concept, something different. It was good to get away from beeps.
Yeah, I'd imagine that you're working with much more ambient air sort of sounds.
Yeah, and okay, example of what you're saying there is when we did The Walking Dead. So we had all these backgrounds built in, and which sounded great, But then Frank Darabont, who wrote it, all the stuff on it, he was the man, came in and listened to it, and he said, nope. He says, after the apocalypse, when the zombies come to life, everything else is dead. So there are no backgrounds. There's no dogs, because they'd eat them. There's no bugs, they'd eat them, right? There's nothing. There's, just flat air. And so we'd have scenes that sounded great, but we'd have to loop every single scene. So as soon as that apocalypse comes down and the zombies take over and he wakes up in the hospital, every single line of that show is looped. And because you had natural backgrounds in there. And we tried to talk him out of it. We said, nobody's going to hear that stuff on TV. It's going to be fine. He goes, no, I want it like that. So when the effects hit, they hit. And you know what? He was so right. He was really right. And I'd never been on a show where they took out just no fill, nothing. And, in a standard way of doing it, you kind of say, but it's just ADR. So the ADR mixer had a hell of a job to do, and he did. And, that's a whole different ballgame. But it turned out he was right. He was correct. And I think that show, actually, I was really happy the way it turned out. So sometimes you're not, sometimes you're, if I watch it today or something, I think, sounds pretty good.
I've got one more technical question, and then we're going to turn it over to the group for questions. Did you, probably more back in the day, did you ever work with big echo chambers or big reverb tanks for your sound effects?
Yeah. At Warner Brothers, underneath the dubbing stages, there's a gigantic echo chamber. And when you mixed, that's what they would dial into. I don't know if it's there anymore. I don't think it is. But there was a gigantic echo chamber down there. And when I didn't know what was going on, I said, was that a bomb shelter down there or something? And yeah, they did. Yeah. So now they manufacture it pretty much. So, but back then there was a gigantic echo chamber. Yeah. Forgot about that.
Now you can pull up impulse responses from just about any room imaginable and
exactly
dial it into your sound exactly as you want.
Yeah, I can make this room I'm sitting in right now cold as can be, just by pushing a button. So yeah.
Yeah, that's always fun. Well, that's some really, really cool wisdom from working in the industry, and I appreciate all those stories. Does anybody have any questions for Walt? I see Presley's got his hand up. Presley, go for it.
Hi, Walt. I just have one quick question for you. If you would love to work on a project that you've been passionate about, what would it be?
Today, or something that's in the past that I would have loved to have
like
done?
something in the future.
Jesus, that's a good question. Well, I always thought that something like Game of Thrones would be great to do. I just think something like that, if you have the time to do it and the resources, because that tests you. It's not a car chase or gun battle you've done 1,000 times, but something that tests you, and something like a Game of Thrones, and something that is that rich. I think that something like that would be cool. Very cool. Or even if they remade, I know they just remade Frankenstein, but if they did some, a legitimate remake of something like Frankenstein, like the Boris Karloff version, and you go in and you had to do it from scratch, I would love to do something like that. Love to do that. Good question, though. Should have never thought of it.
Thank you.
Great question.
Trying to get out of work, not get it.
Are you working on anything currently right now?
Excuse me?
Are you working on anything currently right now?
No, not. Warner Brothers is dead.
Yeah, it's kind of been that way recently.
Everywhere, yeah.
Yeah.
After the strikes and COVID, and it gave the studios a chance to reboot once again. And so I think next year we'll probably be very busy. But, because stuff is starting to go into production, and when you go on the lot, it actually looks like a movie lot instead of a ghost town. And So I think in the coming future, things will be busy. But who knows, a new paradigm of what the workflow would be.
I not to interrupt. I actually heard that they're in the process of being sold to someone.
Right.
Last I
Yeah,
heard, Comcast was interested.
I know Netflix is interested, Comcast, Paramount.
Yeah.
It's I don't know how that question would deal with the product they do, because you still have HBO and you still have all that stuff, Warner Brothers, and they do have a giant television department. And I think one of the edicts of the Warner Brothers lot, unless they sell the lot, is to have a television department and supply a sound department to them. So I'm not sure how all this new stuff would work if they sold out. I know, like, it would kind of break my heart if they did, but it's the world it is today. What are you going to do? So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's a good question too.
Yeah, it's a beautiful lot. I've been on the tour.
Yeah,
I've
a
been
lot. It's a
beautiful
great
lot.
It's a great lot, and it's huge, and it's
Do you-
so much history. It's great.
That actually, since I'm speaking, I'll ask my question. What advice do you have for like
A new
learning how to determine what good audio levels are
guy.
in your projects, like percussion and stuff? Because as a voice actor, I sometimes struggle with that. I'm an aspiring voice actor, but I sometimes struggle to like
Are
work
you
with my
talking about
sound.
voice or sound effects? Are you talking about a voice?
Just
Are
in
you talking
general,
about like loop group type stuff?
I'm doing like narration and commercial, and sometimes I'm trying to learn like levels and like
Well,
making sure your percussion doesn't go too high and stuff like that.
well, what you should have, obviously, if you record somewhere, they'll have a bunch of meters that all of a sudden turn red when you go too high. If you're doing it yourself, you should have those same kind of meters.
Mm.
Honestly, as long as you can, if your diction is good and you can understand what you're saying, as long as you're not too low, because I know a lot of people watch TV and have to watch with the subtitles now because it's hard to understand.
Yeah.
It should be good. Your voice that's talking now is a perfect level, honestly.
Mm.
So, like if you're in a room and honestly you got a studio or something, they'll tell you immediately if you're too loud. Immediately, because it'll crack.
Mm.
It'll digitally crack. So they'll
Mm.
tell you in a second. So it shouldn't be a concern. Just do your natural voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Until they tell you to act.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Noah, I see you have your hand up. You have a question?
What do you plan on to do in the industry now? Do you plan on continuing to work in the industry, and how are you dealing with the contractions?
The contractions of the industry.
Yeah.
I'm at that age now where honestly, I've been very fortunate. Like super fortunate. And in 45 years of doing this, I've essentially never been off unless I wanted to be. So I'm kind of tired. And unless I just finished a show about a year ago. It was actually during the strike about the Black Panthers, the Union Black Panthers, which to me was great and interesting because that's something I'd like to do, and that kind of stuff I might go back for something good. I don't want to go back for, Everybody Loves Raymond's reunion show or something, something like that Black Panther thing, something socially relevant. Yeah. They just called me literally a month ago and said, "Would you think about doing the show?" And da 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 da. And there's all these conditions, and I said, "Nah," because it's just, I don't want. There's a thing too when you get older. Is a lot of, say, maybe associate producers or post producers or are a producer or director's nephew or niece, and they went to film school. And all of a sudden they come in, and guys that have been doing this forever, they start dictating stuff, and it doesn't work, and so I don't want to deal with that so much anymore, and there's a lot of that because somebody has to get in the biz and they think sound is that necessary thing at the end of the line for a lot of producers, and they demean it, and it's sad. A lot of them, I mean, you go in to spot a show and somebody say, "Oh, there's the cricket." People do the crickets or something, like screw you. I mean, it's that. And then there's some who, like the Spielbergs of the world, or some people like that who cherish what you do, and they figure when you walk in there, that's when their movie or TV show becomes a show. And you add all the sound, you add all the music, you add all the sound effects. But there's some who that's the evil at the end of the line. And, not the majority, but enough of them. And that's where they want to save money. And that's where they want to do this or that. And can they get out on the cheap? Because sound is something they don't understand. They just don't understand how it works. And so a lot of them, not a lot, but some demean it and, have no care for it. I mean, there was a certain producer on ER who hated sound effects. He hated them. And you'd have these gigantic busy shows and he'd just start ripping stuff out because he just hated it. And he liked the way it sounded like on a work track. And that's not the majority, but it's some of those guys. And honestly, after you bust your ass and you do all this stuff and you think it sounds great and other people walk in and say, "Oh, it's bitching," and then some guy comes in because he's in a bad mood or whatever. For 45 years, I've had enough of that. So like I said, if somebody comes up with some great movie or great show and, they want me to do it, I'll go back. But till then, I don't really want to go back and do a series or anything like that. I do a good mini series, but not a series. So there you go.
45 is a really good career already in that industry.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, sound is a very transient business. And guys bounce around studios everywhere. And somehow I survived all the 70 different regimes at Warner Brothers. After it went digital, I was the only one that survived. I don't know how I did. Maybe I'm just so full of bullshit I can do it. But it's, it's 45 years is a nice long time. And I don't want to, and I've seen guys literally die there, because they don't want to quit. And they pull them out of their room and they're replaced by the next day. So, it's not a very compassionate business at times. And I don't want to be, I don't want to be there. And all of a sudden I say, wait a minute, shit, I'm 75 years old or something. What happened? And then you're done. So you got to get out while the getting's good and you're still healthy and you do all this stuff and you can be with your family and you do all that. It's a very time consuming business. There's many nights I used to be there 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning. You come in, you go to sleep for 2 hours if you can, and you go back at 7 the next morning because you got to finish it. So before they get to the stage at 9, it can be very time consuming. It can wear thin quick. But like I said, I've been really super lucky. Warner Brothers has been really good to me. Like I can't tell you how good they've been to me. And 45 years is a long time.
That's really wonderful. Have you ever done any documentaries?
Yeah. I don't know if John Ridley, I don't know if you know who he is. He wrote 12 Years a Slave. He did a show called American Crime, which was honestly probably the most important show I've ever worked on. It was great. And he's literally the smartest guy in the room. And he did a documentary on the riots. And I did that. And it was fun. I liked it, And, like I said, he's a wonderful guy. And he's incredibly smart and creative and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's fun doing documentaries. I like it.
It's awesome. I'm about to dive into doing sound design on a documentary I just directed.
It's tricky, especially if it's period. You can't get too big, and you got to make it, when you have those LA riots, it's very tempting when all those stores are on fire and, guys are shooting off the ceilings at people to protect their stores, to go big and do stuff like that. But you got to be real, and it's tricky. It's pretty tricky. But when you're done, yeah, everybody's happy. It's great. So good. Good luck with
Cool.
that.
Thank you. Well, anyone have any other questions? We're right at the top of the hour here.
That's it.
All right. Well, let's go to closing. Walt, I really appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thank
This has been really wonderful. And hope you have a great rest of your night and good luck with everything in the future. As things reopen, hopefully that right passion project comes along that you can
Yeah.
jump on and enjoy.
Yeah, thanks you guys for all asking the questions, and I hope you guys have a great Thanksgiving. And we'll do this again. It's actually kind of fun.
Wishing you a wonderful Thanksgiving as well. And yeah, we'd love to bring you back sometime next.
Okay.
Bye.
Guys.
As we conclude another enriching episode, we hope you found inspiration in the stories shared today. Let's take a moment to honor Yes I Can's role in bringing Breaking the Biz to life. Yes I Can's commitment to empowering young people with disabilities through education, advocacy, and mentorship shines brightly, paving paths of opportunity and dialogue. This podcast celebrates the organization's dedication to nurturing talent and facilitating impactful discussions. Breaking the Biz is more than a podcast. It's a part of Yes I Can's broader mission to amplify voices, dismantle barriers, and craft a world that's more inclusive and accessible for everyone. Each episode is a chapter in our shared narrative of progress, education, and empowerment, driven by the spirit of Yes I Can. Thank you for spending your time with us on Breaking the Biz. Continue to challenge the status quo and share stories that resonate. Until our paths cross again, let's keep transforming aspirations into achievements and infuse every endeavor with optimism. Here's to advancing the landscape of the entertainment industry, one episode at a time. I'm your host, William Felber. See you next time.